Welcome to Nightville.
I had only met my employer once, and that was when I first met him. I was fresh out of college back then with a liberal arts degree and no job. In fact, I had been struggling to find a job for months, and I had been living in my car to save on money. My daily routine at the time was attending job interviews and doing odd jobs for cash. It was a cycle that I thought I was stuck in without any escape. And then I met him. I first saw him standing outside of the building that I had just finished a job interview in. He was old, lanky, and was wearing a suit that was cleaner and better than mine. As I passed by him, I managed to catch a glimpse at his face, and I felt a cold chill run through my spine. Staring back at me with a large grin, as the man gave an unsettling aura that immediately made me uncomfortable. Not wanting to be under his continuous gaze, I decided to quicken my pace and get back to my car. I didn't know why he was staring at me so intently and with such a disturbing smile, but he wanted something from me that he should have called out. Instead, though, he simply remained silent. When I glanced back, I saw him still standing there, still staring at me and still smiling wildly. Now, looking away and trying to forget what I saw, I tried my best to dismiss him as just another weirdo who didn't have anything better to do. It didn't take long for me to forget about the man and turn my thoughts back towards my recent interview. I felt confident about it and hoped that I would land the job. However, this confidence soon wavered when I remembered the previous a dozen times that I felt the same way and ended up not landing the job. It just seemed that no matter how hard I tried, I was just never the one that they wanted. Eventually, the rest of my walk ended up me moping in despair. As I got closer to my car, though, I was surprised to see a familiar-looking man standing beside it. Staring with intent with each step, I tried to push away the thought that it was the same man from earlier. After all, it could just be another suited man who just happened to be hanging out near my car. It was strange, but not impossible. However, as he turned his face towards me and smiled, I knew for certain that it was the same man from earlier. Feeling my stomach drop at the sight, I suddenly stood there frozen and I stared at him. At that point, my mind couldn't help but wonder how he got there before me. He was clearly standing still behind me earlier, and I didn't notice him go past me when I was walking. So how did he end up in my car before I did? Had I been that distracted in my thoughts? More importantly though, why was he by my car? Did he want something from me? And before I could call out to him and ask him those questions, he suddenly spoke up and approached me. Still unaware of his intentions and finding him dangerous, I slowly backed away. "Looks like you're a person looking for a job," he said, his voice sounding rugged and unassuring. "Yeah, why do you care?" I replied, still slowly backing away with each step that he took. "You got one to offer to me?" "Actually, I do," he said, his smile growing wider, if that was even possible. "How would you like to make $10,000 a month?" $10,000 monthly? I asked in disbelief. "You're joking with me, right?" "Oh no, I'm very much serious," he said. "Of course, you'll have to first pass the test to see if you're qualified, but I think you're perfect for the role." "A test? What kind of test is that?" I asked as I continued to keep my distance from him. At the time, I didn't believe a single word that he was saying, and I was just doing my best to distract him until I could get away. "This test." With that, he suddenly lunged forward and towards me, reaching a speed that I never thought possible from a simple old man like him. Before I could react and get away, the man was suddenly holding my arm with a tight grip. Without a word, he then pulled out a knife from his pocket, the sight of which made me freeze in fear. For a moment, I thought he was going to stab me right in my guts. but instead he ended up using the knife to make a light cut on the palm of my hand, my blood coating the steel and dripping onto the ground. Watching him with shock and fear, I then saw him raise the knife towards his face before licking the blood that coated it. "Perfect," he said in a satisfied tone. "You're the one we need. You're hired." While I was unable to process what had just happened, he let go of my arm and allowed me to regain my composure. Realizing that I was free from him, I quickly withdrew my arm towards me and prepared to leave quickly. After all that I had witnessed, I thought that the man was insane. Before I could turn around though, the man pulled out an envelope from his coat and handed it to me. I stared at the envelope for a second before looking up at his smiling face. Unsure what I should do, I remained standing there. "Take it," he encouraged me. "Consider this a salary advance." I didn't trust him, yet I still dared to grab the envelope from his hand. Opening it and taking a look inside, I couldn't help but have my eyes grow wide open upon seeing it filled with $100 bills. "I hope that this will help settle your apprehension," he said, seemingly satisfied with my reaction. Turning around, he then began walking away from me and giving me one last instruction as he went. "In your car is another envelope, a larger one this time. A set of instructions are in it, as well as the tools that you'll need for the job. Good luck." And giving one wave of his hand, he then walked off, leaving me dumbstruck. I turned my attention to my palm. I decided to deal with that first as I tried to rationalize what had just happened. Taking a handkerchief, I wiped away the blood before using it to wrap the wound. Once my hand was wrapped, I turned my attention back towards the envelope that he had given me. Taking a look inside once more, I made sure that what I saw earlier was real. True enough, the $100 bills were still in there. Counting them quickly, I soon realized that I had $1,000 right in my hands. Suddenly feeling unsafe being outside with such a large amount, I rushed back towards my car. As I opened the door though, I found a larger envelope on the driver's seat. Looking down at it, I suddenly realized it was likely the other envelope that he was talking about earlier. How he managed to get it inside, I wasn't sure. My car was locked and secure and there didn't seem to be any sign of forced entry. Somehow though, he had managed to do it, and it brought me chills knowing that he could easily get in. Grabbing the envelope, I then got in my car and made sure to lock my doors. I then spilled out its contents on the front passenger seat before sifting everything that came out. The first to catch my attention was a large folded piece of paper, which I soon realized was a map of Nebraska after I laid it open. Studying the map for a few seconds, I soon noticed a red circle marking a random town in the middle of nowhere. Curiously, I focused my attention there, wondering what it could mean. The place where my place of work would be, perhaps. Hoping to find answers, I took a piece of paper that came with the envelope and read through the instructions that I was given. 1. Every time a map is sent, you must go to the town marked with a red circle and arrive at the area within 7 days after receiving the map. 2. Upon approaching the town, stop at least 5 miles outside the red circle marked on the map. Do not go past that. 3. From the position you choose, open the case provided to you. You will find a needle and a quill in there. Use the needle to prick your finger so that it bleeds. 4. Once you are bleeding, take out the quill and soak the tip with your blood. Using the quill, proceed to shade the encircled mark on the map with your blood, taking care not to smear any of your blood outside of the circle. 5. Upon completing these tasks, your payment will be provided to you instantly. 6. Failure to follow these instructions would result in your termination. After reading those instructions, I wasn't sure whether to believe it or not. The tasks were strange and they made no sense to me. Why was I supposed to drive to a town in the middle of nowhere? Why did I need to smear my blood on the map? Couldn't I just do it all from where I was now? All these questions circled in my mind, and I was tempted to ignore all of this and run off with the money that the man already gave me. Then again, what was I to lose? If I followed these rather simple instructions, if luck continued going my way, then I would be paid rather handsomely for doing nothing but driving around and doing some silly tasks. After thinking about it, I eventually made up my mind. With $1,000 in hand and a potential for much more, I decided to head to the Midwest. A few days later, I found myself in a diner in a town just before the one marked on the map. As I sat there looking over the map while having coffee, I wondered what awaited me after I completed the instructions given. It was during this moment, though, that somebody from behind me suddenly spoke, catching me off guard. "I plan to travel there, stranger," the voice said from behind me. Turning around, I saw a man around my age looking down at me with a friendly smile. Confused at his sudden intrusion, though, I gave him a suspicious glare as I wondered if he was working for the suited man to keep an eye on me. Seeing my rather unfriendly look, the man gave a little chuckle. "No, sorry for disturbing you, but I promise I don't mean any harm. I just couldn't help but notice that you have my hometown marked on that map. You see, it's strange to see somebody from out of town heading there to visit." Still remaining suspicious, I quickly folded up the map. "How do you know that I'm not from there too?" I eventually asked them. "Oh, that place is a small town," he said with a friendly smile. "If there was somebody around my age from there, I would know them." Sighing, I shook my head, realizing that I can't make use of the excuse of me being from there. Trying my best to think of a different reason, I ended up awkwardly staring at him for far too long. The man seemed to interpret this as, "Listen, stranger, I didn't mean to put my nose in your personal business," he said apologetically. "I was just a little curious, you know. Anyways, I'll leave you be. I hope you found what you're looking for there." And with that, he left, leaving me feeling a little awkward and embarrassed. Hoping to shake away that feeling, I decided to head out and take on the last stretch of my journey. Arriving a few miles from town just before sunset, I ended up stopping my car at the side of the road and atop a ridge overlooking the town. What I saw while parked there was just what I had expected, a small rural settlement surrounded by farmland. It was quite a peaceful sight, actually. For a moment, I even considered the possibility of settling in such a place if I saved enough money. After a few more seconds of enjoying the view, I quickly grabbed the map and got ready to do the job that I was sent here for. At that point, I still thought what I was doing was silly. However, as long as I get paid, I was going to do it. Unfolding the map and placing it on my lap, I stared at the map and looked at the encircled town. After checking my phone to make sure that I was a good few miles outside the area marked, I then opened the case and pulled out the stainless steel needle in it. Taking a deep breath, I then quickly pricked my left index finger, making sure that it was enough to make me bleed. Once that was done, I then used my free hand to bring out the quill and dip the tip of my bleeding finger. After making sure that enough of my blood had soaked into the quill, I then gently lowered it towards the map and hovered it over the area where the town in front of me was located. Without hesitation, I then began shading the area with my blood, following the instructions carefully and making sure that I didn't spill any outside. When I was sure that I had completely covered the circle, I lifted the quill and stared at my work, and then I began to laugh. What I just did was bizarre and made no real sense at all. It seemed funny at the time, and being there and actually having done it made me think that it was just silly and stupid. I ended up laughing for a whole minute before noticing that the ground was shaking. At first, it confused me, as I felt my car swinging gently. Eventually, the shaking started to intensify, and I assumed that an earthquake was happening. I wasn't too worried though, since there wasn't anything that could fall on me from where I was parked at, but the feeling of being rocked was not a comfortable sensation. Luckily, the shaking didn't seem to increase more than enough to shake my car, but as I looked in front of me, I saw something that made my heart stop. Rising from the ground around the town were strange pillars, at least a dozen of them. Staring at them with wide eyes, I watched as they rose higher and higher from the ground. As I did, I suddenly realized that they weren't simply pillars. No, they were tentacles, large tentacles that wiggled in all directions. From afar, it reminded me of the tentacles of a squid. However, unlike a normal squid, these tentacles were huge. Based on the nearby houses that stood near one of the tentacles, I would estimate that each one of them were around 100 feet in diameter. They were monstrous, and they just kept on rising, pushing up higher than the tallest structures of the town. As the tentacles continued to rise, I began to notice a red glow emitting on the ground around the town. From my vantage point, I watched in amazement as the glowing area seemed to form a perfect circle. Starting out as a strange light, I then noticed that it was emitting heat, as the sensation could be felt even through my car. But that then made me realize, if it felt uncomfortably hot from where I was, then it must have been unbearable from the town. I shook my head and tried to not think about it, as I imagined haunting images of the people there, as if I was being taunted. I suddenly heard screams ringing all around me, as if there were thousands of invisible people being tortured and crying for help and mercy. I don't know how that was happening, but covering my ears didn't seem to work. It was as if the screams of these souls were in my very head. Pained by the sensation, I found myself jumping out of the car, thinking that I could escape the noise outside. It was a stupid action, and it obviously wouldn't change anything, but the pain was making it difficult for me to think. As I stepped out of the car, I immediately fell onto my knees due to the continued shaking of the ground. Frustrated and overwhelmed, I cried out and begged for the noise to stop, but it never did. Instead, the screams grew louder and louder until they mixed into one haunting noise. Eventually, though, my mind and body managed to acclimate enough to the screaming for me to be able to focus in my surroundings. Despite the pain that I was feeling from the deafening screams, I was able to glance towards town to see that the tentacles had stopped rising and were now protruding at least a mile high from the ground. By then, the shaking of the ground had stopped, and I was able to steadily get back on my feet. Looking up, I stared at the skyscraper-sized tentacles that made me feel puny below it. Watching them wiggle and sway in different directions gave the sensation of both terror and discomfort. It looked so unnatural that there was no doubt in me that it was not from this world. After standing tall over the town for what seemed like an eternity, I watched as the tentacles suddenly tipped down towards the town. Moving in unison, they descended down towards the poor settlement, before hitting it with a loud, earth-shaking crash. Bits of houses could be seen flying in all directions, and I could only imagine what those monstrous appendages would do to people that it fell on. Strangely enough, the number of screams that I was hearing suddenly reduced after that. Although I could still hear pained shouts and crying, its loudness was reduced to half. The slight relief this gave me was quickly shattered upon the realization of what that meant. My mind was too clouded by pain to think of it earlier, but not that I was slightly brought to ease. I quickly drew the conclusion that the screams were from the town's inhabitants. If that was the case, though, then the fact that it was lessened meant only one thing. I felt sick in my stomach at the thought of that. However, the horror of what I was witnessing was not over yet. After the tentacles landed on the ground, I watched as they began pushing the whole town down towards the earth. With a force that I thought impossible, it pushed the ground down as it and the houses and the streets began to disappear. Unable to look away, I kept my eyes fixed at what was unfolding, while my mind was tortured by the increasing screams of the few people who remained alive there. Eventually it ended. The tentacles disappeared into the ground and the red glow that encircled the area where the town should be was gone. What was left was an empty expanse of open fields with no structure or people left behind. It was as if nothing had ever existed to begin with. Also gone were the screams. As I found my head had become quiet once more. Yet despite that, I felt more sick than I was earlier. Although I was far from the destruction, the horrors that unfolded left a mark in me, as these sounds of the victim's screams still echoed in my memory. To make things worse, I began to quickly realize that I wasn't just an innocent bystander. As my head began to clear, it soon dawned upon me that I was the one who likely had caused all of that to unfold. I was the one who destroyed that town. I was the one who had killed the thousands of people who lived there. Unable to control myself, I ended up kneeling to the ground once more and puking. I don't know how long I ended up puking and coughing on the ground, but eventually I heard the sound of a car stopping near me, followed by a door opening. Still traumatized and sick from what I had encountered, I paid little notice at first and I continued to stare at the ground. However, once the person who got out of the car approached and spoke, I immediately recognized who it was. "Hey, you okay there, stranger?" A familiar voice said. Immediately looking up, I saw that the man standing there was the same one that I had met at the diner. The same man who said his hometown was the one that I had witnessed being destroyed. Unable to speak, I just ended up staring at him, not sure how to interact. He, however, just gave me the same friendly smile. "Oh, wow, it's you again," he said with a chuckle. Still not much of a chatterbox, I see. Anyways, you okay there? You seemed to be really sick when I first noticed you on the side of the road." Seemingly unable to form words at the time, I simply pointed towards the direction of where the town was. And deep inside, I felt guilty, knowing that I had helped in the destruction of his home. Trying my best to hold my tears down, I wanted to desperately apologize to him. All his family and friends were gone now, and it was all because of me. However, the man simply gave me a confused look as he glanced towards where I was pointing, before turning his attention back to me. "Those are the fields you wanted to visit, right?" he asked me. "I still don't know why you want to go there, but if it's that important to you, I won't question it." "Fields?" I asked, confused. No, that was where your hometown was." "My hometown?" he asked before laughing. "I lived here for a long time, stranger, and I can tell you that that land there has been an empty field since before I was born. My hometown is farther up from here, say 30 miles further north." None of that made sense to me. At first, I thought that I misunderstood where he said his hometown was earlier, but then I thought that I couldn't have. After all, he saw my map and the name of the town that was encircled there. So why did he claim that he was from a different town? And then a creeping thought entered my mind. Was it because of the same evils that caused the destruction of the town? Had it also twisted and distorted his memory and reality? Realizing that possibility brought a chill down my spine. Silently, I ended up getting on my feet and walking back to my car, ignoring the man's worried calls. I kept on thinking about what I had done and the work that I had agreed to do. What I initially thought was a silly and pointless job, it turned out to be far more destructive and dangerous than I thought. As I sat back in my car and closed the door, I saw the reason why I had agreed to it. Laying there on the front passenger seat was a backpack that I didn't own. Moving my shaky hands to pick it up and place it on my lap, I nervously opened it to see wads of $100 bills in it. Along with them was a small note. It read, "Your next assignment will be sent to you next month. Till then, here's your pay. $9,000 in cash." $9,000. Add the $1,000 that I was given earlier and that makes 10 grand, just as promised. That was the price of all the lives that I had killed. That was the price of all the memories that I had altered, and the result of the simple and horrifying job that I had been hired for. What I was given was blood money, no doubt about it. I felt repulsed, both by it and myself. Putting the bag back on the passenger seat, I gave one glance out to the man who was still standing there and staring at me. I wanted to apologize, to tell him what I had done to him, but I didn't. He would never believe what I would say, and no apology that I gave would ever make up for what I had done. Because of that, I simply looked away and drove off, heading back from where I came from. Although he would never understand it, I felt guilty for what I've done to him in his town. That was 9 months ago. Since then, I've done one job every month for my employer, erasing small towns from different states, terminating the lives of thousands upon thousands, and altering the realities of those who had been fortunate enough to have left their hometowns. I've been paid handsomely for all of this, and now I get to live in a nice home and I no longer have to worry about money. Am I proud of my job? No. In fact, I'm ashamed of what I do, and I'm haunted by the screams of those who I had condemned to hell. Can I leave my job? I don't know. I don't think my employer would let me leave, and I already consider myself lucky that he isn't forcing me to do all of this. I fear that trying to refuse would only make things bad for me. So I've decided to enjoy my compensation and try to live with the guilt as best I can. I have things pretty good after all. Although sometimes I can't help but feel that all of this would bite me on the back someday. Most of the time, I try not to think about it too much. However, once in a while, I do end up being a little curious. After all, he probably doesn't want these towns erased for no reason. If he did though, then that would be a scarier thought, knowing that a man just wanted it done for the heck of it. I don't think that's the case with my employer though. Recently, my curiosity behind the greater meaning behind things grew once again, especially after my most recent excursion. It was supposed to be just like my previous ones, and go to the place, erase it from existence, and receive my money and leave. Now, it sounds simple when I put it that way, but no matter how many times I do it, it never was simple. And despite all the terrors I was constantly hearing and seeing, I never became desensitized. That was a good thing, since it at least made sure that I was still human. A terrible human, but a human nonetheless. On that day though, as I marked my blood on the map and readied myself for what was to come, I was not prepared for what I witnessed. As usual, it began with the trembling of the ground. Standing outside and looking out at the distant town in front of me, I watched and waited for the tentacles to sprout on the ground. To my surprise though, they didn't appear. Instead, large arm-shaped appendages emerged, a dozen of them doing what I was used to seeing the tentacles do. Staring with confusion, I watched as the hands on the end of these arms opened up, its fingers stretching wildly before pointing down towards the village. Just like the tentacles of the past, These arms followed a similar formula to what I had seen before, and they fell down and crushed the village, filling my ears with the screams of the residents. Yet, for the first time since I took the job, my mind was not focused on the victims. Instead, my thoughts were too preoccupied with the arms, as I wondered why they had appeared instead of the tentacles. What did it mean? Did I summon something different this time? If so, what was it? Stuck trying to find answers, I failed to notice the arms push the town down to the ground and disappear. My attention only returned to the unfolding events when I saw something else new occur. As the usual red glow continued to emit in the area where the town was, something new began emerging. Wide, frightened eyes. I backed up from where I stood as a large head began rising in front of me, its surface rough, gray, and scarred. Keeping my eyes on it as it went higher and higher, I noticed patches of scars littering its skin, exposing dark black flesh and even metallic bone in some portions. It was a terrifying sight, and I felt more puny than I ever had in the past during that moment. As the head continued to rise high, it eventually stopped just as the jaw emerged. Laying dormant like that for a few seconds, I then saw its eyes scan the empty fields in front of it before dropping its attention on me. Unsure of what to do and not wanting to unintentionally provoke the giant in front of me, I simply stared back at it and stood still. Eventually, a loud booming voice echoed in my ears, although I didn't see the giant's mouth open as I heard the voice.
You have done well, my child.
It said with a tone that made my spine shiver.
My power grows stronger because of what you and the others have done.
After that, there was nothing but silence. Looking at the gigantic head in front of me, I then saw it give me a large smile, one that would forever haunt me as the gaps in its teeth seemed to give me a glimpse of an empty void. As it continued to smile at me, the head began to descend down and back into the flowing ground, while the eyes of the giant continued to stay locked on me. Eventually, what could be seen of the creature had disappeared, leaving me facing an empty and quiet field. As I stood there, more shocked than I was when I did my first job, I couldn't help but struggle in grappling with what had just occurred. This was clearly no normal job, and no note from the suited man ever hinted anything like that would happen. And when I stumbled back into my car, I noticed the usual bag of money on my front passenger seat, containing the usual $10,000 salary. I could care less about it though, as I sat in the driver's seat and tried my best to comprehend what I just saw. The shock of things though made it difficult, as my heart continued to beat fast. After a while though, I managed to calm myself enough to think straight. Whatever that giant was, it was clearly not a threat to me. At least that's what it seemed. After all, it thanked me for my services and it seemed pleased with what I was doing. So that meant I shouldn't be afraid of it, right? Convincing myself that I was safe as long as I continued my work, I managed to dissipate the fear that was boiling in me ever since that giant had emerged. As I drove off and started the journey back home, I couldn't help but continue to think about what that creature had said, especially on what he meant by others. Was he talking about the suited man? Were there others doing work for my employer that were aiding that creature? For a good while, I thought about that, only to get frustrated when I realized that I'll probably never get an answer. I had no means of contacting the suited man to ask him, and even if I was able to, I doubted that he would freely tell me. Slowly, I began to accept the fact that whatever that thing was would forever be a mystery to me. However, as I stopped by a diner to replenish myself on the way home, I saw something that managed to relight my earlier search for answers. As I was moving to get a seat, I noticed a man sitting near the entrance with a map sprawled on his table. At first, I didn't pay too much attention to him, thinking that he was just another traveler. However, as I passed him, my eyes scanned the map that he had and noticed that he had marked various areas on it, areas that seemed to be in the middle of nowhere. Instead of cities, towns, or tourist sites, he was marking empty fields and random portions of road. This immediately lit something inside me, as I took my seat and kept on thinking about what I had just glimpsed. You see, after every job I did, I always paid respect to the places that I erased by marking them down on the map. Of course, no trace of them remained, but a simple mark with a name was enough to honor them. Seeing the man's map that day, I thought I was looking at the same one that I had made. Immediately, I could only conclude one thing from that. He was just like me. He worked for the suited man too. At least that's what I assumed. Remembering that the giant had mentioned that there were others also helping it, I couldn't help but connect the dots. Was he one of the others that it was talking about? That thought of there being somebody out there with the same job as me both excited and terrified me. For starters, it meant that I was not alone in the job and that there was somebody else who felt the same trouble that I felt from what I did. But then again, it also meant that there were more towns being erased, more people whose lives were altered. That latter thought brought a shudder through me, as I had to shake my head and try not to think about it too much. Desperately, I wanted to go to the man and talk to him. There were so many things that I wanted to ask, from how he dealt with the heavy burden of our job, to whether he had seen the same giant that I saw that day. It wasn't like that wasn't allowed. The rules the suited man gave me never mentioned that I wasn't allowed to talk to others like me. However, as I turned my head to check the man, I was disappointed to see him no longer at his seat. Instead, I noticed that he had already gotten up and was heading for the door. As I watched him, I saw a familiar-looking backpack slung on his back. And that alone was enough to tell me that my theory was right. Deciding not to chase after him, I sat there and hoped that I would encounter him again someday. However, there was something nagging me, something that made me uncomfortable. Recalling the map that I saw, I suddenly felt the urge to compare it to the one that I had. A day later, as soon as I got home, I rushed towards my room and pulled out the personal map that I had to mark the sites of my recent jobs. Laying it down on my bed, I then grabbed a marker and began placing an X on the general areas that I saw marked on the other man's map. I couldn't recall every single area that he had marked, but I recalled just enough to pinpoint the general area pretty decently. Once I had finished plotting down everything that I could remember, I then looked down on the map and glared at it with a dreadful expression. The towns that I erased, combined with the ones that I recalled that the man had charted on his own map, formed the shape of an incomplete pentagram. Based on my estimation, my employer was, more or less, 10 towns away from having it complete.